All right, it is 12 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get things started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our summit on post-traumatic stress disorder entitled Raising Our Hands, Supporting PTSD Identification, Diagnosis, and Treatment Across Diverse Communities. This summit is co-hosted by the Anxiety and Depression Association of America and the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, and supported by Otsuka. My name is Katie Russo, and I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Business Development and Operations at ADAA, and the proud EMC of today's summit. The focus of today's discussion will be on understanding ways to more effectively support individuals with PTSD and their support partners, informed by contributions from our diverse slate of panelists. Our panels today will explore the unmet economic, medical, and humanistic needs of individuals living with PTSD, and you'll hear directly from experts on what can be done to address these unmet needs. While today's aim will be to take a comprehensive look at the PTSD journey and identify gaps and opportunities for added support through the lens of medical experts, lived experience advocates, and support partners, and professional organizations as well, please know that the next 2 hours really only marks the start of what we hope will be an ongoing conversation around PTSD. Each of today's panelists knows there are countless issues surrounding PTSD, like access to care, workforce shortages, and healthcare delivery challenges, and we're all just really scratching the surface here today. Throughout the summit, we'll share a number of resources that are available to the public free of charge, and you'll also have the opportunity to view the slides presented today, along with a recording of the summit itself in the coming days. For those of you with burning questions, you'll have the opportunity to drop those into the chat throughout the summit, and there'll also be a post-summit poll sent out via email where you can send in your questions as well. Before we dive in, I'd also like to take a moment to encourage you all to follow ADAA and DBSA on social media, as both of our organizations are posting helpful, evidence-based, free resources for the public on PTSD and other mental health disorders. PTSD is a challenging, misunderstood, and all too common disease. Its impact extends beyond individuals to family members, loved ones, and entire communities. Yet in the face of these challenges, there are dedicated advocates, including people with lived experience, healthcare providers, and more, working towards building a greater understanding of disorder to improve the patient journey and to demonstrate that recovery really is possible. Before we begin, I'd also like to acknowledge the collaborative efforts of ADAA and DBSA's teams and the network of members that have joined together to organize this robust, solution-oriented discussion. We'd also like to recognize Otsuka's patient advocacy and stakeholder management team, who have been incredibly valuable partners throughout this entire process. And now I'd like to introduce our opening speakers, Susan Gurley, Executive Director of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, and Michael Pollack, CEO of the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, who will review our agenda and outline the objectives for today's meeting. Susan and Michael, I'll hand things over to you. Oh, Susan, I think you are on mute.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
Sorry. As Katie mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. And I am truly honored to be here with my colleagues from DBSA, Otsuka, and others who are speaking about this very important topic. ADAA is a nonprofit membership organization. We work to destigmatize mental illness through education, practice, and research. I wish I could tell you that our mission is a simple one. It's not. We want to prevent, treat, and eventually cure anxiety, depression, and related disorders, of which PTSD is included. Therefore, working on PTSD-related issues is a priority for all of us at this summit. One of the things that I really like about the summit is that we have so many people who are speaking and sharing their information, and that DBSA and ADAA are providing free resources that are evidence-based to the public. So the reason that we're here is, as Katie mentioned, we're going to discuss the unmet medical, economic, and personal costs of PTSD, particularly in underserved civilian populations. And meeting needs in underserved populations is important because while PTSD can affect anyone at any time anywhere, marginalized populations are at higher risk for developing PTSD. As Katie mentioned, we're also working towards earlier identification and clinical treatment of PTSD. That's why you will hear some medical experts on the summit. And then the summit, as mentioned before, is bringing together diverse stakeholders, including people with lived experience, support partners, nonprofit organizations such as DBSA and ADAA, and healthcare providers. We are all convening together to share best practices and information. So we are very honored to be part of this very important panel. We're also very excited that this will be the beginning of many conversations. So thank you again, and I'm going to turn it over to Michael, who will introduce himself. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Pollack, and I serve as the CEO of the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance. At DBSA, we aim to provide hope, help, support, and education to support those impacted with mood disorders such as PTSD. And I'll share more on what we're doing to advance these aims during our last panel today. I've been in the nonprofit sector over 30 years. I'm probably more excited than ever now about the trajectory and impact of our collective work. It's truly inspiring to witness a growing number of organizations dedicated to raising awareness and educating the public on mental health conditions. Simultaneously, the direction of research is promising as we continue to gain deeper insights and knowledge about PTSD. I have a lot of optimism that by highlighting the diversity within the PTSD population and the myriad of experiences of those who have endured trauma, we can continue to attract increased resources and support for these individuals and communities. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to bring this discussion to such a large audience today. Together, we can make a meaningful and enduring impact on the lives of those affected by PTSD by raising awareness and sharing crucial resources. As an advocacy organization, we embrace the responsibility of empowering individuals through education on those available resources. We believe in equipping individuals with the tools to make informed treatment decisions. In our respective roles, it is imperative that we mobilize and both educate and learn from each other, especially those with lived experience, while simultaneously raising awareness of the needs of peers and their support partners. Given the alarming prevalence of PTSD in our society, there's an urgent demand for more effective solutions. Today, we're diving into an exciting discussion focused on opportunities to elevate awareness, improve patient pathways to care, and strengthening support throughout the patient journey. As our understanding of underserved populations and the far-reaching impact of PTSD deepens, we're eager to focus on and invest in transformative solutions that will alleviate the burden of PTSD for patients, their support partners, and communities.
Thank you, Michael and Susan. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lauren Sipple and Jyoti Agarwal, who will lead our opening panel entitled A Look at the Data, Expanding Understanding of the PTSD Patient Journey. Dr. Sipple is an assistant professor of psychiatry at Dartmouth and associate director of the VA's Northeast Program Evaluation Center in West Haven. She also serves as the co-chair of ADAA's PTSD Special Interest Group, which aims to support career mentorship, dissemination of research, and advancement of quality patient care. Jyoti Agarwal is the senior director of Otsuka's Global Integrated Evidence and Innovation Team, overseeing research initiatives and evidence collection that highlights the unmet needs and burden of disease related to PTSD and other CNS conditions. Dr. Sipple, I'll turn it over to you to guide us through the crucial aspects of PTSD, starting with its definition.
Great, thank you, Katie. Can everyone hear me okay? Fabulous. Okay, next slide, please. Fabulous, thank you. So first of all, let me just thank the National Center for PTSD, of which I'm an affiliate, for providing the content for many of the slides that I'll be presenting here this morning. So first of all, what is post-traumatic stress disorder? What is PTSD? This is a mental health problem that people can develop after going through or seeing a life-threatening event. It can also be caused by learning about the violent or accidental death or injury of a loved one. Because they involve matters of life and death, these events are different than the stressful events that many of us experience very regularly, like losing a job, getting a divorce, or even good things that are also stressful, like buying a home or getting married. And they're different than the daily hassles that we all experience, like a car breaking down or doing chores. This is not to dismiss the importance of any of these types of events that can cause a lot of disruption in our day-to-day lives. But PTSD itself can only develop from what we call traumatic events. These are events that are, again, caused by going through or seeing a life-threatening event, violent or accidental death or injury of a loved one. And that's important to keep in mind. Now, everyone with PTSD experiences it differently. There can be lots of different ways that it can show up in people. But in order to be formally diagnosed with PTSD, 4 types of symptoms must be present. First, experiencing unwanted memories of the traumatic event or events. Again, unwanted memories. 2, avoiding reminders of the event. So avoiding people, places, things, even internal types of reminders like memories. 3, having negative thoughts and feelings. These might be negative thoughts about yourself, the world, or the future, and negative feelings like sadness, anger, shame, etc. And 4, feeling on edge, really jumpy, easily startled, kind of always on the lookout, that type of thing. Next, please. So trauma is unfortunately so common. Worldwide, about 70% of people experience a traumatic event in their lifetimes. Many have experienced more than one traumatic event. That means that most of the people that you meet every day have probably experienced at least one trauma at some point. Now, it's important to keep in mind that while the experience of trauma is widespread, some groups of people are more likely to experience it than others. Military veterans, people who are members of the LGBTQ+ community, people experiencing poverty, and Black, Indigenous, and people of color individuals are more likely to have a traumatic event happen to them. Next slide, please. So it's really normal or typical to have upsetting memories, to feel on edge, or to have trouble sleeping after this type of event. Okay, it's completely normal to have what might look like PTSD in that early aftermath or early period after a traumatic event, days, weeks. Most people, amazingly, because we are so resilient, most people will start to feel better after a few months. But if it's been longer than a few months and those negative thoughts and feelings and really troublesome memories remain, it might be PTSD. And for some people, PTSD symptoms start later on, or they may come and go over time. Again, it can look really different from person to person, and this is one of the ways in which it's so important for us to hear lived experience hand in hand with the research that I'm talking about here today. So I'm just so thrilled that we'll be able to get both sides of that point here today. Next, please. So there are several factors that have an impact on whether someone develops PTSD, including risk factors that are associated with the person, with the traumatic event that they experience, and with their lives afterwards, the recovery environment. Unfortunately, science has not yet given us a really clear, equation or algorithm that says if someone has X, Y, and Z factors, they're at greater or poorer risk or lower risk. It's just not quite that simple, but we do know a lot about individual factors in these different domains that may increase risk of developing PTSD. So personal factors include having experienced previous trauma, being of younger age, or being a woman. And I'll say more about that in just a bit. The aspects of the traumatic event itself matter too. So the overall risk of developing PTSD after traumatic exposure is 4%, but that varies significantly by trauma type. So depending on what kind of traumatic event or events you've experienced, the greatest risk of developing PTSD is associated with surviving sexual violence. The environment in which someone is trying to recover from exposure to trauma is also really important. It is well documented that having a stronger social support system is associated with better recovery from trauma. So having people, friends, loved ones, peers, colleagues who offer, a sense of understanding and lack of judgment of what you're going through is really, really well connected to how recovery from PTSD will go. Additional risk factors for developing PTSD include, again, other stressful life events like divorce, income or neighborhood poverty level, historical oppression, society and cultural influences, and being a member of a high-risk group like law enforcement or first responders. So all of that to say, again, these risk factors are very important, but we can't say that someone will definitely develop PTSD after a trauma because of any of them in isolation. Next slide, please. So who is at greatest risk? So again, not everyone is at equal risk for developing PTSD if they encounter a trauma. Some specific groups have higher risk. So women are more likely to develop PTSD than men. Okay, and we have some stats up here to kind of contextualize some of what I'm saying here. But women, again, are twice as likely to develop PTSD than men. And we don't have a great understanding of why that is. It can be both sociocultural and or neurobiological, and that can be applied to any of these groups. In terms of race and ethnicity, the rates of PTSD are higher among Black or African American individuals compared to white, Latino, and Asian individuals. As I already mentioned, LGBTQ+ people have the highest risk of developing PTSD. They're also a very, very high risk of experiencing traumatic events. And again, Indigenous populations are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience PTSD compared to the general United States population. Next slide, please. Turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, Lauren. So we've learned so far, can we go back one slide, please? Apologies. Great, thank you. So we've learned so far about what PTSD is and who is impacted by PTSD, which hopefully dispels some myths suggesting that PTSD is rare, only a military disease, or only impacts men. As noted by Lauren, trauma is fairly common, and some individuals may be at a higher risk of developing PTSD than others, and those who develop PTSD can experience debilitating symptoms. However, the PTSD symptoms themselves are only the beginning. What's listed on this slide is certainly not exhaustive, but hopefully gives you a flavor of what some of the individuals with PTSD and their families may be experiencing. PTSD symptoms can impact daily living and lead to social isolation and relationship problems, increased risk of suicide and substance use, functional impairments, including the inability to work, reduced quality of life, and be associated with physical health problems such as GI problems, headaches, hormonal issues, obesity. The list is long. Additionally, there can be significant family or household spillover effects, increasing secondary stress within a household and mental health conditions like anxiety and depression that become just as debilitating as the PTSD itself and can lead to additional substance abuse in the household. Overall, the impacts of PTSD can be far-reaching to families and on society as a whole. Recent estimates suggest that PTSD is costing over $250 billion per year when you take into account factors like the inability to work, homelessness, incarceration, medical costs, etc. And honestly, in my opinion, as a researcher, this is likely an underestimate. Next slide, please. So we've seen big picture that the impacts of PTSD are on society. Now I want to share with you some of our real-world data that we have showing a timeline of PTSD diagnosis and treatment. This particular analysis is based on over 680 patients who were diagnosed with PTSD and saw a psychiatrist. I'm going to walk through this slide from left to right. As you can see, our data suggest a bit of a gap between the trauma and the symptom presentation, so about 2 years. But overall, the time frame from the trauma to the diagnosis of PTSD can be very lengthy. And here we see on average about 9 years. This was a very interesting finding for us, and we utilized this research coupled with expert opinion and supporting literature review to identify a range of potential reasons for this apparent diagnostic delay. Some of these reasons were related to the diagnostic criteria themselves, and others related to individual or system level concerns like employer pressures or concerns with legal ramifications. I won't go through each of the individual boxes, but will note that stigma and an unwillingness to talk about trauma is a significant challenge, yet is an important criteria for the diagnosis of PTSD. Now shifting more to the right-hand side of this timeline, you'll see that while there is a lengthy pathway to diagnosis and recognition of PTSD, once it is diagnosed, an appropriate treatment is provided, there is hope for a positive outcome and relief from symptoms. So at this point, I've talked about the burden and challenges related to PTSD, the impact on individuals, their families, and society, and the challenges with diagnosis, and wanted to turn it back to Lauren to talk about the right treatment, how the right treatment can potentially help.
So next slide, please. Great, thank you. Okay, so as Jyoti was just saying, there's good news. When we can get people into treatment for PTSD, especially in the form of trauma-focused therapy, they have really good chances of recovery. Other therapies and certain medications can also be effective. Treatment works. For some people, treatments get rid of symptoms altogether. For others, it can at least make those symptoms less intense. Treatment has several benefits, just some of which are listed here. Of course, trying to reduce or eliminate symptoms, but also to many of the other consequences that Jyoti was just telling you about. We also have found that improving PTSD can lead to improving relationships, to having new coping skills that allow folks to respond to the inevitable ups and downs that happen after PTSD treatment, and so importantly, to find hope for the future. Next slide, please. And as I just mentioned, when we say trauma-focused therapy, we really mean treatments that focus on the memory of the trauma and its meaning. Focusing on trauma memories can sound really, really scary. Jyoti mentioned about how, and I as well earlier mentioned that, PTSD is associated with avoidance. And yet the fact that folks often want to, and understandably don't want to approach trauma memories, can make it certainly hard to get into treatment, but also hard to even get the diagnosis of PTSD. So with that being said, focusing on trauma memories in the context and in the care of a trained professional can really help a person with PTSD feel better. And for most people, improvement starts to happen after only a few weeks or months of treatment.
Well, thank you.
Katie, are you going to cover our key takeaways, or are those for me and Jyoti?
You can cover you'll cover the key takeaways, and then I'll transition to the next one.
Fantastic. That's what I thought. And suddenly I had a moment of doubt.
I got excited.
Yeah.
Oh, you're doing that, really.
So that's why we're here. Okay, so a couple of takeaways, because Jyoti and I have shared a lot of information with you. So first, PTSD is a mental health disorder that may develop in individuals after witnessing or experiencing shocking, violent, threatening, or dangerous traumatic events, a single event or several events. PTSD is highly prevalent and has a very significant negative impact on individuals and society. Some individuals may be at higher risk for PTSD simply based on who they are and the experiences that they've had. And there can be an extensive delay from experiencing trauma and being diagnosed to appropriately treated for PTSD. And that I didn't put this on the slide, but also when folks get treatment, it often works really well. But all that being said, there are clearly many opportunities to improve the overall patient experience. And that's what we'll be hearing more about today.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sipple and Jyoti, for your insightful contributions and for all of the research that you shared with us today. We're looking forward to continuing these discussions in the sessions that come. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Alpha Stewart, who will be moderating our next panel featuring lived experience advocates and support partners.
Thank you, Katie. And welcome everyone to this panel part of the webinar. It's my distinct pleasure. I'm Dr. Alpha Stewart, and it's my distinct pleasure to be moderating this next panel. You're about to, now that we've heard the science behind PTSD and have a good understanding of what the PTSD diagnosis can mean and how it can be manifested and treated, now you're going to hear from people with some experience living with this and being part of support networks of people who live with this. You see on the screen here the panelists. We've got quite a host of panelists to talk with you today. And we're going to start off with Minister Stephanie Lynn. Stephanie's going to lead this part of our discussion. And what we'd like to do is I'm going to ask each panelist as they begin their comments to really respond to this question. Talk to our audience, share with them what your experience, how you experience PTSD as you've made your journey through this process. So Stephanie, why don't you begin us?
Hi, my name is Stephanie Lynn. I'm here due to lifelong experience with domestic violence. I'm also the director and facilitator.
Well, Stephanie, we're having a bit of
We're having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, is this better? A little bit better? Can't really hear me?
Not really.
Okay, I'll turn up some so you can hear me better.
Stephanie, you might try unplugging your headset. That might assist with the audio as it'll go through your computer.
Is this better at all?
Yeah, very, very
Okay.
much better.
Okay, my name is Stephanie Lynn. I am a peer due to lifelong experience with domestic violence. I'm also the director and facilitator of a nonprofit mental health support group in the South that focuses on advocacy and educating marginalized communities. My experience has been more, like I said, it's lifelong. I've been involved in some type of way or affected in some type of way by domestic violence since, to my understanding, from infancy till today. Up till today, I'm still experiencing some things. It has had a major impact on my life because it's also affecting children, PTSD and anxiety as a result, despite the fact that I've been treated since I was in my 20s. So it was not as if I was oblivious to the fact that I was suffering from some type of mental health disorder. I did, receive treatment. However, the problem was that nothing was effective long enough to make a difference. So as of today, what ended up happening, let me digress a little bit. What ended up happening is I did the genetic type where they swab your mouth to find some type of treatment that may, be best for you genetically based on your genetics. And that was more effective than just, trying things over and over again. And that has even worked to the point where now the combination of medications that I have been taking have made a significant difference in my life. And it's helped me to be able to be more supportive as the director of a nonprofit that assists others who oftentimes don't even know that what they're dealing with or coping with is, a manifestation of long-term trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thanks, Stephanie, for sharing that part of your experience of your journey. The next person who's going to share with us is Michael Urim. Michael?
Yes, good morning. I'm honored to join this panel and webinar as a caregiver. As has been noted by Dr. Sipple, PTSD is a mental health condition triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it directly or witnessing it. And seeking help for trauma is critically important. Brianna and other panel members will talk about experiences and observations of PTSD from external events. My name is Michael Urim, and I'm a caregiver for loved ones who have experienced severe trauma. In my extended family's case, however, the trauma has been triggered by internal events, namely psychosis and/or hallucinations. When one of my loved ones kept telling me that he had PTSD, I was dismissive and told him, "No, you don't. You've never been in the military, you've never been abused, etc." I did not understand how traumatic delusions and hallucinations can be. I assumed that these brain neurochemistry disorders primarily affected cognition, namely thoughts, and not so much feelings, meaning emotions in the nervous system. Oh my, was I wrong. Whether the trauma is triggered by external events or internal, namely psychotic experience or events, the four symptoms of clusters that Dr. Sipple mentioned still hold: unwanted memories, avoiding reminders of the event, negative thoughts and feeling on edge. The anecdotal reports from my loved ones of trauma are echoed by reports from many of the families in the caregiver support group that I run of 5,000 families around the world. We are caregivers for loved ones who have bipolar, schizophrenia, or schizoaffective disorder. Here's some examples. I live in suburban Chicago, and the area is filled with local toll roads with cameras and electronic monitoring. My loved one would dive under his seat every time we went through a toll booth. Another one of my loved ones would tense up every time he saw a homeless person, even though he himself was homeless for 38 years. He believed that homeless people would spy on him through his cell phone. Another experience, one of my loved ones, upon seeing a police car, ran into a nearby forest preserve, climbed a tall tree, and stayed there all night, lashing himself in so he wouldn't fall out when he fell asleep. He was deathly afraid that they were after him and would do him harm. These psychotic illnesses, traumatic as they can be for years, can also trigger repeated trauma in caregivers like myself, and I indeed have experienced that. And this type of trauma is called complex PTSD, meaning that the experiences and events are continual and they keep going. As a person who experienced CPTSD, complex PTSD, was always feeling on edge, fearfully waiting for the next out of the blue crisis from my psychotic loved one. How did I overcome it? First, my loved one got better, but I got therapy for myself. And for a whole number of years now, I've been on a mild antidepressant. So I'd like to share 5 key takeaways from my experience as a caregiver. 1, psychotic illnesses like bipolar, schizophrenia, and schizoaffective are traumatic for our loved ones who have them. 2, if caregivers do not understand this, as I did for far too long, the trauma for both loved one and caregivers increases and gets worse. 3, imagine the further trauma of telling a rape victim that he or she was not raped. It was all in their head. Well, the same thing holds true for those whose trauma stems from delusions or hallucinations. To them, it is real, and their brain and nervous system reacts to it just as like for a rape or abuse victim. 4, caregivers must build and work with and over-communicate with their loved one's care team, psychiatrist, therapist, family doctor, and all other family members. Each member of the care team must be aware of each other's interactions, assumptions, approaches, and treatments. And lastly, every psychiatrist, every psychiatric nurse practitioner in the country must have personal and direct contacts with support and education groups like DBSA and ADAA and NAMI and others. As my family psychiatrist said, mental illnesses, namely brain neurochemistry disorders, are a team sport. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Those were quite important points there at the end. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit more before this panel concludes about some more of those takeaways. Our next panelist is Brianna Hines, and Brianna is going to share her perspective on the experience of PTSD from her viewpoint.
All right, thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Brianna. I am a peer living with general anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, bipolar type 1 disorder with psychotic features, and PTSD. I am the chapter president for DBSA Southern Nevada, and I am in the process of getting my peer recovery support specialist certification. So I'm doing my hours with NAMI. So my PTSD stems from my 4 back-to-back psych ward visits from June of 2022 to September of 2022. In my visits, I felt that persons with bipolar disorder can be labeled as dangerous or very impulsive with our quick thinking. So I was treated differently than other patients who may have been there for depression, suicidal reasons, or psychosis. So during one of my visits, I received a shot in the rear, and that was a very traumatic experience as a young woman with an all-male night staff at 2 a.m. in the morning. The nurse issued the shot because technically I refused to take whatever pill that was offered, but I know my rights. I can be in my room, I can pace the hallway as long as I'm quiet, or I could be in the quiet room. After the shot was administered, I felt that a part of my soul died. I just remember crying and screaming and just feeling very helpless in that moment. The next morning, I told the patient advocate what occurred, and they agreed that the shot was unwarranted. The nurse who ordered the shot didn't return to the unit for the remainder of my stay. I had received a few more shots, but those were like in the arm, and even for those, I felt that they weren't necessary. Every time I got a shot, I just remember thinking, why is this happening to me? I didn't do anything. It wasn't until I had my first unwanted flashback in May of this year that my therapist and I realized that I was experiencing symptoms of PTSD. It was very strange that I was out with my mother at dinner and she said a word and it triggered a flashback, and I just froze for a few minutes because I felt like I was back in the psych ward. I had a psychosis episode recently in June, and I had to go back to the psych ward, but this time I attended their partial hospitalization program after my inpatient stay. The therapist there heard my story, and they had me attend the group sessions for those experiencing PTSD. And when I was discharged from the program, they gave me the information for a PTSD treatment center. They did warn me that it was difficult to get an appointment with them, but I did at least apply to be seen. But even now, I still haven't heard back from them. So luckily, the counselor that I'm seeing now plans on doing some treatment options to help with my PTSD. So that is my story.
Thank you, Brianna. And I'm seeing in the chat a lot of people are feeling for you and the experience. So I think we're going to circle back to you also to talk a little bit more about what we providers need to understand in the context of how we can create these environments for what you experienced. And our final panelist this morning to kick off to talk about his experience is Robert Dabney Jr. Robert, take it away.
Hi, Dr. Stewart and other panelists. Thank ADA and DBSA and Otsuka for allowing us to get this conversation going, as well as the other panelists that shared their story. My name is Robert Dabney Jr. I am a mental health advocate working outside of Chicago right now. I serve as the DBSA Peer Apprentice Program Manager. I also have the opportunity to work as a path guide for Boulder Crest Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that teaches post-traumatic growth skills to veterans and first responders. I myself am a veteran. I left home in the military from Memphis in '98, joined the military as a medic. And I loved the job. I did it for 9 years, from '98 to 2007. On the second deployment into Iraq, some things were going on with my kids at home, and I realized that they needed me there. And so I chose to get out of the military in 2007 and start a life outside of service. At that time, when I got out, everything was good as far as I knew. I had all my limbs. I was still able to hold a communication down with other individuals and talk with people, relationships, excuse me. And so for about 5 years, everything seemed to be going according to plan. In 2013, I began training. After leaving the military, I became a hospital chaplain. And so I began the training for that hospital chaplaincy. And that experience is something that kind of woke up a lot of the trauma that I had pushed down from my experience in combat. I did 2 tours in Iraq, in Baghdad and Ramadi. And as a medic, you saw so much, but also needed to be on point at every moment that I just stuffed it away and continued to move on. And I did that really well. I did it really well. So much that I didn't think that there was any need for me to seek help outside of myself. But in 2013, I started the training to become a hospital chaplain. In order to do that, it's important that we have healed within ourselves so before we can go out and try to help other individuals. And so I had to begin to work on myself. And that was the first time I ever really looked inside and explored a lot of the experiences I've been through. And opening that up and allowing those things to come out just kind of hit me in a way that I wasn't expecting and wasn't anticipating. And I began to just have different thoughts that I didn't have in the previously, but I continued to push on. My wife started to notice and recognize certain things in me that was changing in the way I reacted to her, or the way I interacted with our kids, or the fact that I didn't have any new friends. And so she suggested I go and talk with someone, and I did. And that's when I received the diagnosis, 2013, of PTSD and major depression disorder and generalized anxiety. But I didn't let that stop me. I continued to press on. I finished that internship as a chaplain, went on to get a graduate degree in MDiv, and ended up being placed in a hospital here in Chicago in 2017. And so that's when I started my career as a hospital chaplain. And what it began to really come out for me was an inability to control my reactions, an inability to just really have decent conversations with people without me getting upset, or without questioning everything they said because I didn't trust them from the back of my hand. And so it kind of showed up very slowly to me. The slide that they showed earlier that said it's about 9 years, I did the math. It was 7 years for me before it really started to show up. And what was most difficult for me, though, was finding the words to begin to communicate what I was feeling and experiencing. I didn't have vocabulary to really share with anyone what I was experiencing. So even in my counseling sessions, I didn't know how to talk and open up. And so it was a long line of just more and more frustrations, followed by relationships falling apart, and also me ended up leaving that job in 2020 because of my mental health. And so it kind of slowly made its presence in my life to the point that I couldn't ignore it any longer. And again, it wasn't these singular events that caused me to duck under the seat, or a car backfiring and causing me to run or get afraid. It was more so along the lines of the way I saw the world and saw people, and the fact that I couldn't trust the structures that I was a part of so much that it kind of disconnected me from it all. And it took a lot of outside support and help for me to begin to see that and to see how this has been showing up in my life. And so it's been a long journey. I feel that I truly began to heal around the year 2020 when I stopped everything I was doing and tried to focus on healing for myself. But I'm just honestly reflecting on the fact that I still have so much more growth and so much more healing to do. It's not something that is with me every day. In fact, I can go now at this point in my life, I can go weeks without experiencing any type of unnecessary rage or lack of trust issues, or any of the other myriad of symptoms that show up after these experiences that we have. But and some days I do wake up with that different mindset again, and it's important to have people around me that can identify it and support me in it and know how to help me get back to a place of centering and groundedness. And so it's been a long journey. Again, I got out of the military in 2017, started acknowledging it in 2013, but still 10 years later, I'm still healing from it, but I'm in a place that I would consider myself thriving now. And so, yeah, that's my journey so far.
Well, thank you so much, Robert, for sharing your journey. I think we've got some time, so I have a couple of other questions I'd like to pose for every panelist to respond to, but a couple of comments, just kind of consolidating around what each of you has shared from your respective positions. The sense of insidious, Robert, you even calculated the years, much like our first speakers talked about how long between recognition and diagnosis and getting into treatment. And it sounds like for each of you, there was this notion of, I can't believe it. I don't understand it. This is not what it really is. That was a first, if not the first feeling. And then somehow the ability to try to control it, because you can't be that out of control. You can't have those kinds of things happening. And then the impact that it had on the relationships you were involved in. Michael, for you as a caregiver, it made you reevaluate and renegotiate, if you will, with your loved one around understanding that a psychotic disorder can in fact be traumatizing, and no one had ever told you that or told him that apparently, or understood that. Brianna, your story of the repeated incidents that resulted in your journey. And then Stephanie, I know from our earlier conversations that for you, a lot of your issues began centered around domestic violence. And I feel like because of the technical difficulty, we really didn't get the full sense of your journey. So if you want to take a few minutes and kind of explore with the attendees more of that story, please feel free.
Okay, certainly. I found out actually through family members that I had been subjected to domestic violence as early as infancy. So, of course, I was oblivious to that. But by the time I was about 4 years old, I just had a natural desire to support and help others who were dealing with mental health issues. And for some reason, adults would gravitate to me, like other domestic violence victims, particularly women who were experiencing that. And it was strange to me, but it was also comfortable for me to comfort them. So that in of itself caused me to be able to open myself up to being okay with who I was, and being okay with supporting others who were dealing with trauma. And it just so happened my mother was one of those people. I consoled her through a lot of her experience. And that, of course, changed the dynamics of our relationship, but it also helped me be able to navigate different ways to cope with my own issues without ever expecting that to be reciprocated. I ended up, a coping mechanism for me was to dissociate. And to be honest with you, I know there is maybe some negative connotation attached to that in the mental health, as far as mental health is concerned. But for me, it is still something that I do because it's comforting. I'm the narrator of the child who was exposed to domestic violence. I am not that child, so I don't internalize it as much as I used to. And that has helped me to be able to support others, even in my nonprofit, just find other ways to step outside of the scope of being a victim and more so a survivor. And what I also want to mention is that despite there being literature and information in regard to the long-term effects of stressors that can cause or lead up to PTSD or affiliated with PTSD, I've had a problem with getting the medical community to make the correlation between that and other conditions, such as hypertension, for example. I suffered from hypertension for so long as, being exposed to post-traumatic stress disorder conditions. I ended up having a stroke, which at 44, which, they didn't understand because I didn't have any other physical or any other medical problems that would make sense to the medical community. So they didn't understand that what I was dealing with was internalized. It was something that was going on the inside, despite me telling them I am in a domestic violence situation. And so the stroke has left me with some deficits still to this day. I have hemiplegia, which basically means my left side of my body is not functioning as well as the rest of my body. I've had a long journey to recovery. I went from a wheelchair to being able to facilitate and direct an organization, a nonprofit organization or a support group to help expose the situation as far as how we can be affected physically, how those internal issues can manifest into physical disabilities. I'd also like to add, as I had spoken about briefly in the beginning, I have children who have been affected in various ways because we've had an ongoing journey with domestic violence. It's due to generational domestic violence and poverty.
Okay. Thank you for expanding on your experience, your story of your experience for us. I think since we do have some time, I think I'd like to do another round of a question for each of you to weigh in on. And each of you, again, has mentioned in your story of your experience and your journey, the interaction you had with someone as a treatment provider who either didn't understand, didn't believe, didn't seem to know what to do to help you. If you could today say one or two things that you would want everybody listening who is a provider to remember going away from this, give them one or two things that if they didn't know it before this webinar, the next time they hear someone, Stephanie, who talks about being in a situation, having these physical symptoms, what should we as providers be listening for and doing, doing about what we hear in order to not create more and more individuals who have the same experience that you do? Who wants to start off? Brianna?
Yeah, I can go first. So it was a pattern for me that when I would be in the hospital, like sleeping and whatnot, that I would always have trouble sleeping. So whenever the night staff would come, I would tell them, I'm like, I'll see y'all at 2 a.m. when I wake up. So it's just being trained to not just sedate someone if they're having trouble sleeping, but actually be okay with doing your job as far as watching whoever that person is, just take notes. Because it wasn't at every psych ward visit that I had. It was just that particular one. Because I went to, in the 4 visits that I went to, 3 times I went to the same one. But the one time I switched it up and went to that other one, that's when the incident occurred. So it was just, I would want particularly staff who work in the psych wards to know how to be trained and how to deal with particularly persons with bipolar disorder and mania and depression, anxiety, all these different things. Because I did I still do have pill taking anxiety, which was part of the problem with me and the nurse. I was asking him, okay, what is this? What does it do? What are the side effects? I wasn't just going to take it because the nurse told me to. So because I was asking these questions, it has, I guess, upset him and he authorized the shot. So it's just a matter of knowing how to deal with people who have mania and bipolar disorder and not just, be so quick to sedate us, because it does cause, harm. Whenever I would have to go to the psych ward, it was always like, okay, this anxiety feeling of, okay, am I going to have to, deal with getting more shots just because of my diagnosis, not necessarily because I was out of control or, dangerous to myself or others. So that is my takeaway.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Michael, I noticed you're off mute.
Yeah, a couple of things. First, although it feels strange to say this to an audience of 900 of my closest friends, I was particularly uneducated about all of these topics. When I teach a caregiver class, and I always start with a quiz. What parts of our bodies do we use to see, hear, smell, feel, and taste? And almost everybody gives the same answer that I did. Well, eyes, ears, nose, skin, and tongue. Wrong. It's our brain. All of those sensory organs are simply input portals where that electrical information is processed neurochemically in our brain. We make sense of our world in our brain. It's brain neurochemistry. So the first thing I would say to psychiatrists, clinicians, providers, nurse practitioners is patients, or as I like to call them, our loved ones, who come asking for help. Their experiences are real. They are not crazy. Their brain neurochemistry is interpreting and misinterpreting input signals that are absolutely real. The second thing that I would tell providers is listen non-judgmentally. Everyone deserves respect. Their experiences are real. The more we dismiss them, either as caregivers or clinicians, therapists, the worse they get. The more dangerous and closer they come, to be honest, to suicide, because the suicide rate for these psychotic illnesses is 8 to 10 times higher than their age peers. And Brianna, I see you shaking your head, yes. And Alpha, can I mention one comment about my own journey?
Yeah.
Again, this feels strange to say to an audience from around the world or wherever of 900 of my closest friends. But I'm one of 6 kids. I was raised in an extremely loving family, 2-parent household, wonderful parents, very religious and moral and ethical environment. When one of my loved ones in a psychotic episode stole a car, I couldn't conceive that. I'm a poly purebred kind of Boy Scout kind of person, right? I've never even been drunk in my life, and I'm 69 years old. I couldn't figure out what I had done wrong as a father, as a parent. My world collapsed. For 3 years, and this is no exaggeration, for 3 years, I cried myself to sleep and I became suicidal because I couldn't figure out why I had failed my number one most important responsibility as a parent: raise loving, honest, kind, gentle human beings. It took a long time to work through that. But as my loved one got better, as we found meds, after him being in psychosis for 8 straight years, That helped me. And then I got help with the therapist and, as I mentioned before, antidepressants. So that's my journey.
Thank you, Michael. That's really quite moving. Thank you. And honest and realistic. Stephanie, did you want to add something? You're on mute.
Absolutely. I've been in treatment or trying to seek results for 30 years. I was aware that something was not, quote unquote, right. However, because and I've seen so many different mental health professionals, the problem is there seemed to be some type of cognitive dissonance, like they knew, but they didn't know. So they would want to focus on what they knew that they were able to resolve. But that left all the other issues untreated. And then, of course, that manifested in no treatment for anything because they're all interconnected. So that has been my problem with finding support that is, of course, respective of continuity, but also understanding that there is a connection.
Yeah.
For example, I'll just throw this out there. I have other chronic health conditions like hypertension and diabetes. And it was as simple as me Google searching and finding out that those conditions, as well as fibromyalgia and lupus, all of these can be connected to the mental health disorders that I'm dealing with. And the problem is that when you go to see a specialist who specializes in one thing, he focuses on that one thing. And of course, it's hard to find a solution when you're having to go to different specialists and they're not looking at it as a totality of conditions. They're just focused on what they're wanting to assist you with. So that has been the frustration for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you also, Stephanie, for raising for this panel and the listeners, the fact that we must pay attention if we're really going to provide what we know to be person-centered care, that we've got to pay attention to the entire body, not just the brain disorder, but the rest of the body that walks right along with that brain. So that, and you heard in the first presentation, there are medical conditions that are directly related to PTSD, not the least of which are hypertension, other cardiovascular illnesses, diabetes, and you've experienced, unfortunately, several of the other diseases, which we know the science tells us leads to persons with mental illness dying at least 25 years earlier than their counterparts without mental illness, because of what you described, the fact that we see what we see and not the entire person. Robert, how do you want to weigh in on this one?
Just briefly, I want to just ask all the service providers or remind them to honor the human being that's sitting in front of them, regardless if it's their 16th patient for the day, or they always get the kids from this school to come see them, regardless of who it is. Honor the individual that's in front of you, hear their story from their perspective, and do all you can to continue to see them as a person and not as a case to move past. That is something that can be very detrimental to somebody that's already struggling to be seen, heard, or felt valued. So.
Okay. Well, it sounds like each of you could use just a couple of minutes to kind of wrap up your thoughts on what we did on this panel. I will tell you that some of the takeaways that I'm carrying are each of you has talked about being listened to, being honestly and clearly listened to as you are speaking or your loved one is speaking, that we acknowledge that everybody's experience of any disorder is going to be unique and has to be honored and respected. The listening part, I think, supports the concept that you were just talking about, Robert, of being able to listen and care and advocate for that person in front of you then, and not see it as a one-size-fits-all kind of a response, or this works because this is the diagnosis, to your point, Stephanie. And then Brianna, if I take away nothing else, it will be a reminder, like I hope my colleagues who are providers, that everything that we do matters. Nothing is inconsequential or innocuous, that it all matters. So in the remaining 7 minutes or so, why don't we do one last, any final comments you all want to make as we close out this part of the program?
I'll start so as not to go last this time. Just for anyone that's watching, whether you are someone that experiences PTSD or you treat or care for those that experience that, know that hope and healing is available. Know that diagnosis isn't a jail sentence. It's not something you will be held into for the rest of your life, and that healing can happen. But it takes the courage enough to be able to go and talk to someone. It takes the courage to be able to be honest with yourself about what you're experiencing and what you're feeling, and finding someone to talk to about that, with the knowledge that healing is possible. And so don't run from it. Go through it. You can make it.
Okay, all right. Stephanie, you're on mute.
Okay, are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to add that I want to encourage everybody to investigate any concerns that they may have, regardless to whether or not they think that it's quote unquote serious enough. There is a lot of information online, even through DBSA, where you can find out if a lot of the symptoms that you're dealing with may in and of themselves be related to mental health disorders, because it's important to find out sooner than later. And just ignore the stigmas attached to that, because that's just part of the process. But healing is possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, for caregivers, I would say always try to keep top of mind that it's not about you. It's not about us as caregivers. All of these conditions, they elevate the effect or the primacy of emotion over cognition. So people react and act out of raw emotion, out of feeling, out of hurt, out of agony, without going through the filter that we all have in the cognitive part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. So caregivers must keep that in mind and do our best not to react, but to respond with what's called emotional intelligence. And the second thing I would offer is your loved one, the most important person in the world, is you as a caregiver. More than anyone else, they need you. They need us as an advocate who know them the best, who love them the most, to be their unceasing advocate, just like Robert mentioned earlier. Nobody can get through one of these conditions alone. It takes a team, but it takes an incredibly strong and emotionally intelligent advocate, and that, as a caregiver, is me.
Thank you. Thank you. Brianna?
Okay. What I wanted to highlight or just, emphasize that those in the mental health profession, like Robert was saying, act with compassion like it would be someone of your family or someone close to you, because we could tell, like those, when I was in the psych ward, I could tell who actually cared versus someone who was just there because they couldn't get a job somewhere else. Like I actually wrote a letter to leadership when I was in the psych ward, and I, just emphasized that as well. I was like, if you're just here to get money, then work somewhere else. If you don't actually care about those with mental conditions, do not take this job unless you actually want to help the process instead of adding to the trauma and the stigma that these people are crazy or, all these different things. So I realized that telling my story in group therapy settings like the partial hospitalization program and DBSA meetings, that, I'm not alone in my daily struggles. And I think that is something that helped me when I was experiencing my PTSD. And I think that receiving treatment from a professional who understands your type of trauma that you've experienced is also important to the treatment plan.
Oh, thank you. Thanks to all of you. You have been courageous today in sharing your stories in an open, highly personal way. I think lots of people in the listening audience have gotten some great information, have been encouraged to do some of the things that you are doing in support of themselves and their loved ones. And I'm hopeful that this transition from understanding the science to understanding the lived experience will help some people move into that area where you all are clearly. And I, for one, have enjoyed immensely being part of this panel. And thank you for your expression of information and emotion, Michael, as well as support for others in similar situations. And Katie, I think it's back to you.
Yes, thank you, Alpha. And again, echoing to all of our panelists, thank you for such an important and engaging discussion. We'll now have a little over 6-7 minutes for a break. We'll reconvene at 1:20. During the break, you'll see 3 slides that contain the results of ADAA and DBSA's fall newsletter poll, where we received more than 120 responses. The first slide you're going to see is a word cloud that shows the words our respondents most closely associated with PTSD, and the greater the number of responses, the larger the word is going to be on the screen. The second and third slides you'll see are the topics that our respondents wanted to know most about. And I want to call out that over half of the people who participated in the survey wanted to learn how to talk to their doctor or therapist about their PTSD symptoms. So please enjoy the break, and we will begin promptly again at 1:20. All right, it is 1:20. So welcome back from the break, everyone. We'll now continue with the summit. Our next panel is entitled Building Bridges for Change, a call to action for advancing PTSD solutions. And with that, I'll turn things over to the moderator of this panel, Kimberly King, to get us started.
Thank you so much, Katie. Welcome back for the last session of our summit today, which is entitled Building Bridges for Change. My name is Kimberly King, and I am the Senior Manager of Mental Health Equity and External Partnerships for the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance located in Chicago. And I am so delighted today to be your moderator for this session. The goal of this panel is to explore the initiatives aimed at advancing solutions to address the unmet needs of individuals living with PTSD, as well as highlighting potential new collaborations and tactics to support those with lived experience. I'm delighted today to be joined by our esteemed group of panelists. Bringing back with us today, Robert Dabney Jr., who's going to share more about his path to becoming a peer support specialist. We have Deborah Lafar-Schur, who is the Senior Advisor at the Milken Institute of Health and the former Executive Advisor to the Veteran Affairs Secretary. We also have with us Susan Gurley, again, who is the Executive Director of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. And last but certainly not least, we have Michael Pollack, who is the Chief Executive Officer of DBSA. And now we're going to open up the panel, and we're going to start off with Robert. And I'm going to ask Robert to speak to the concept of post-traumatic growth, which is a topic that he is very passionate about. Hi, Robert. How are you?
Hey, Kimberly, thank you. And thank you all again for this opportunity. I was first introduced to the topic of post-traumatic growth through Boulder Crest Foundation and Warrior Path, their program, and that was in 2022. Since then, it's something that I've been really throwing myself in, trying to understand it, so that as a peer, I can help other individuals have this concept and this frame of reference so that they can have something to strive towards. But post-traumatic growth in a nutshell is a term, a concept that was developed by Dr. Richard Tedeschi and Dr. Lawrence Calhoun back in 1995 at the University of Charlotte, North Carolina. University of North Carolina in Charlotte. They were working on the paper and essentially trying to figure out where deep wisdom comes from. And they began to study different cultures and some of their teachings from the past. And they began to find that individuals that had experienced deep suffering began to kind of rise to the top as leaders. And so they took that and continued to do more research and came across articles on the Hanoi Hilton, individuals that were POWs in Vietnam for anywhere between 4 months to 8 years. Those individuals came back from Vietnam with lower levels of PTSD or shell shock, as it was known at the time, than the average military member that was in Vietnam. And so they continued to do these studies to figure out what was going on. And as they got closer to an understanding of what was taking place, they realized that this was something that could happen naturally for anyone under the right circumstances. And so post-traumatic growth in a nutshell is the idea that positive change can come out of experiencing highly stressful experiences. For myself as a veteran, the lessons and experiences I experienced through combat, through growing up, are things that held me back at one point, or I thought held me back. But as I began to do the work and go inside and learn the lessons that came out of that, I began to grow. I began to get a bit stronger, and I began to be more willing to face whatever life has to throw our way. And that is what post-traumatic growth is about. And I believe that it's such an important topic for not only individuals with PTSD, but those that are caring for individuals with PTSD to be aware of, because again, if you don't know that there is hope up ahead, you could easily fall into the idea that this is the way things will be always. And that's post-traumatic growth is something that just blows that scenario out the window and allows for individuals to accept where they are in the moment and then begin to find the fortitude to work towards growth and healing. And so as it said here on the slide, post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic stress disorder can happen simultaneously. They can go hand in hand with one another. The idea is that individuals that are looking to heal and grow can do so, and post-traumatic growth is the way that can help them get there. The post-traumatic growth itself can be identified in 5 topics. And if we can go to the next, yeah, thank you. Individuals that have experienced trauma and have overcome them and begin to heal from those things have found that they've grown in these 5 particular categories. And I'll just read through them real quick and add a little synopsis for them. I'm gonna start at the bottom with spiritual and existential change. An individual that goes through some of the most frightening experiences that they could ever go through begin to ask deeper questions about the notion of reality and God and why these things happen to certain people. And in those questioning, they begin to come to an understanding that the world may be just a little bit bigger than they at first understood. And there are things that happen to them. It may be from a universal perspective, it may be from a God perspective, that are happening to them. It may have hurt in the moment, but eventually it led to their good. And so I look at individuals from the media that goes through tragic incidents, whether they had a bad accident or they had some kind of major fallout. When they do come back to the public, they're a different person. They're no longer the same. And that's an idea of what spiritual and existential change could look like. The 4th one that's here is personal strength. That's the idea that if I live through this traumatic experience, I can live through anything. The hardest things that I have already been through, they may have impacted me some, but I've already survived them. So what's stopping me from surviving something much larger or stronger? And that just that understanding gives people the courage to go out and try things that they may have considered hard or that they wouldn't do in the past. And just doing that leads to new possibilities in life. Individuals that go through these traumatic experiences and face the next day and find the courage to be able to get up and go back out and try again, they begin to look at the world through a different lens. When we're hit by trauma, the thing that shakes us oftentimes is our core beliefs around how we see the world, how we see other people, and how we see ourselves. And so understanding that, gaining this understanding that post-traumatic growth concept provides helps individuals not only begin to see themselves differently in the world as far as spiritual and existential understanding goes, and not only do they understand that they have more strength than they've ever thought themselves to have, but they also realize with that they can have new possibilities in life. They can go and do things that they may have never dreamed of, but they realize they have the capacity to do so now. Another aspect of this is relationships with other people. Going through some of your darkest moments in life, you begin to value the individuals that bring you hope. You begin to value the individuals that held you up during those times. And by developing stronger relationships with those people, you have put into place a network, a web, if you will, of individuals that can hold you up when you do fall again, or if you do fall again. But also, the more we understand about the gift of life, the more we begin to value those that are around us. And that's something that also leads to deeper relationships. And the final one that's up there at the top, I left it for number 1, is the appreciation for life. All in all, life is beautiful. It was beautiful before we were born. It was beautiful after we're no longer here. But the confusion of the world, the traumas, the life experiences that we go through at times can knock us in a way that causes the picture to be a little fuzzy and things don't work out the way that we think they should. But in pursuing this path towards post-traumatic growth, individuals eventually get back to a place where they can begin to just appreciate some of the smallest things in life, whether it's the fact that the sun rose today or the fact that they have a jacket and it's 30 degrees below zero outside. Just having appreciation for something inside is a step towards no longer sitting in that darkness of depression or anxiety or whatever it may be that plagues individuals. And so post-traumatic growth in itself is not something that's old. It's not something that's new. It's something that's been around. It's now being put into a structure that clinicians can take and work through with their clients, work through with the individuals that they're serving. And this is why I believe it's such an important topic to what we're discussing here today in PTSD.
Well said, Robert. Thank you so much for sharing and explaining to our audience today why this framework is so important. Really quickly, in the interest of time, can you just talk a little bit briefly about how peer support, you as a peer support advocate, as well as your experience and role with DBSA, can provide support to others?
Yeah. So with DBSA, I've been able to really dive deep into the field of peer support. I am now a certified peer support specialist, and peer support is what I'm calling the gospel of recovery. I use that term unabashedly because it is the truth. It is the good news that individuals can recover when they are walking with people that have also gone down the path. And so working with DBSA since 2021, we started the Peer Apprentice Program, and that is a program that we went out to the southwest sides of Chicago, looked for individuals from historically marginalized communities, the BIPOC community, that has lived experience of a mood disorder, and gave them an opportunity to begin to get the experience and the training needed to sit and test for the state exam as a certified recovery support specialist here in Illinois. And so that's something we've been doing since 2021, and it has gone great. Individuals are beginning to learn more about mental health advocacy, but also what it means to be in recovery and reduce the stigma. And so these individuals that come into the program, the Peer Apprentice Program, are now like released back into the communities to be able to be advocates in their own communities, to be able to help individuals move through the mental health network, which can be very confusing in itself. And what I really like about peer support is, one, it's peer-led. Individuals don't need to go and get a college degree to become a mental health, to serve others in this field. But also with this idea of post-traumatic growth, a peer support specialist having a good understanding of post-traumatic growth and ways people heal. These two hand in hand are ways that we can begin to foster more healing in the communities on the ground, peer-to-peer level, when we reach the place that the clinicians aren't available because of the backups that we're seeing. And so peer support, what we're doing here at DBSA with encouraging more individuals to gain their certification and become peer support, along with the skills and understanding of post-traumatic growth, are a left hook, right hook tandem that can begin to really make an impact on communities on the ground level, where clinicians aren't able to yet reach because of time restraints and insurance restraints even.
Thank you, Robert. Now we're gonna transition over to Deborah LaFarge. Deborah, the VA has had a lot of success in implementing a number of non-clinical programs that are widely available and free of charge. Can you share with our audience today more about these resources and how they can access those?
Well, thank you, Kimberly. It would be my pleasure. And I just want to say, Robert, it's a gift to share this panel with you. You really inspire all of us to reach deep and to do the hard work on our own, but also know that we're not alone as we do that. And I think, you know, we're at a time in America where so many people are desperate for community, and the peer support program that you are part of is really so valuable to people. So thank you for your service, and thank you for sharing. For everybody who's on this call, we're really focused on non-clinical resources in this conversation, but I just want to emphasize that if you are a veteran, or if a friend or family member of yours is a veteran and they would like treatment, to please reach out to the VA. When I talked with them and discussed some of these services, they said, please, we offer evidence-based treatments. We want every veteran who is struggling to seek help. So that's my number one message here today. There's help available, and please encourage people to seek it. What you see on the screen here, if you look over on the left-hand bar, you know, a typical website, these are all of the categories of resources that have been developed at the VA, and these are your tax dollars at work. So everything you're going to see here, everything I'm going to talk about, is available to you for free. And it's available to you whether you're a veteran or not, whether anyone in your family has served in the military, and whether the PTSD patient is a veteran or not. These were designed with veterans in mind, but much of the content and much of the applications is really appropriate for PTSD sufferers around the country. So it was interesting during the break, some of the data that was put up, two of the highest rated barriers were lack of awareness and limited support from loved ones. And so, the second tab here says understanding PTSD. And so perhaps this will be useful to some of the people on the call. Perhaps it will be useful to others who are struggling to initiate a conversation around this topic. It also provides information on understanding the treatment, on where to get help. And most importantly, some information for family or friends where, we heard limited support from loved ones. Often that limited support may be because people don't know what to do and don't know what to say and don't know what would be most helpful. And so there are tools here which allow you to have that conversation and provide you with some capabilities to make that connection. You'll also see that there's links to published articles which have come out from the VA, clinical trials that are going on. And a lot of this information is also available in Spanish. So why don't we go on to the next slide and we'll just dig into a couple of these resources, but I wanted everyone online to see the comprehensive list so that you can go to the website if any of these might be helpful or appropriate to the situation you're juggling. So PTSD Coach is available both as an app and as a website, and it has everything that you could imagine a coach might need when working with a PTSD patient, friend, family member. It has meditation tracks. It has calming music. It has tools for keeping track of symptoms. So I would encourage you to look at that. About Face really gets to the issue that PTSD is not one category of symptoms. There are so many varieties of PTSD, as many as there are human beings. And in fact, in the word association graphic that was up during the break, we saw veteran listed twice, but we did not see domestic abuse. And that is actually from Otsuka's research, the #1 cause of PTSD. And so I think that's helpful context. In this About Face program, you can look up videos and real life stories from PTSD veteran sufferers. You can look for a woman versus a man. You can look for different age groups. You can look for different ethnic backgrounds. You can look for different types of PTSD. Some of it is what happened in the battlefield. Some of it is military sexual trauma. And so I would encourage you to either try to find a person in this About Face that fits with your experience, or one that you think might resonate with a family member or a friend that you're trying to help. And lastly, I wanted to share, if we could go to the next slide, the VA has a free PTSD consultation program for providers who treat veterans. So there are many veterans who work with providers in the community. So they don't go to a VA medical center, either because one is too far away or because the wait time was too long. And so they're working with a member of the community. So any provider, and this is not just a physician, can contact this service and get help with cases where they're not sure what to do, evidence-based treatments, articles that they're looking for to support, going in one direction or another with their treatment recommendations, assessments, referrals, a whole host of resources are available here. And again, they're available at no charge. There are other resources if you drill down on the site for For example, how to lead a race-based military trauma peer group. And the VA is really trying, as you can see from the videos and some of the information that's available on this site, to speak to individuals for individual groups as much as they can about how trauma is affecting them. So I'm just going to wrap up and say, I know there's a huge amount of information in this world, and sometimes it's difficult to get beyond all the clutter to find tools that are gems, tools that can really make a difference to people, and now tools that are free. So I'm hoping that by sharing these, they will be helpful to all of you on this call. So thank you for including me today.
And thank you, Deborah. Such a wealth of resources available to the public for both civilians as well as military individuals in the military. So we're going to open it up now to talking to Michael and Susan about the role and work of advocacy organizations. I'm so glad to have you with us today, Michael. Michael, can you tell us a little more about how organizations like ADAA and DBSA, why they're so important, and what role do you have in helping to support people who live with PTSD and receive better support?
Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you, Robert and Deborah. Susan, it's been a pleasure co-sponsoring this event with ADAA. DBSA is really focused on what I would summarize as saying peer support, and Robert talked a lot about peer support, but also peer empowerment. Some of the ways that we encourage peers to feel empowered is to really address stigma, including self-stigma, addressing that shame that may prevent someone from seeking support or seeking help or treatment. So we encourage peers to think about how they can receive better treatment by advocating for themselves and being active in their own treatment. And I think that's also a really important role for care partners as well. Feeling comfortable disclosing to individuals in their lives, their circles, so that they have a broader array of support around them, and also by sharing, feeling less shameful or stigmatized for having PTSD or a mental health condition, and empowering peers to really think about what does wellness mean for them and what kind of wellness resources could help them achieve some of their life goals. So those are some of the things that we try to advocate for at DBSA.
Thank you, Michael. Susan, similar question. How does ADA do similar work and accomplish this mission?
Well, first of all, sometimes I forget why I'm part of an organization like ADAA. The day-to-day work is sometimes tedious, as we all know. And today's personal stories reminded me of why I do this work. It reminded me why it is important to share with people the struggles one is going through, and why it is important for us as human beings, whether we work for any of these organizations or not, to actually listen and care for the people who are suffering. So I wanted to first thank everybody for reminding me why I get up every morning. And I also wanted to tell DBSA, I think your peer work is wonderful. It's extraordinary, probably better than what we do at ADAA. What ADAA does is, because we're both a professional membership organization and a public-facing organization, our members, their expertise develops the content. And for example, Lauren Sipple is one of our members. She shares her expertise, not just with her clients, but with her community, which is ADA. And many of our members donate their time. So for us, what we are able to do is we are, like DBSA, able to provide free evidence-based information. And that goes to what many of us have talked about, and Deborah mentioned as well. There is so much information out there, and most of it is really sound. But our job, like the VA and the DBSA and ADA and other nonprofits, we need to make sure it is evidence-based so that people can trust the information that we provide. And the last thing I will say, we also have a Find Your Therapist tool where our members who are therapists list their names, where the public can go and look for experts who may be experts in PTSD, anxiety, depression. And I encourage anybody who is listening to go and see if there's an expert with PTSD that might be living in your area. But before that, always remember that you have the right as a consumer, before you decide whom you want to use as a therapist, to ask them questions about their area of expertise. How long have they worked in this area? What is their approach to PTSD? You have the right to be an educated consumer, and you have the right to ask your potential therapist tons of questions. So remember to use your voice, feel empowered, and that there are a lot of organizations out here to help you. And again, I am very grateful for being included and for Otsuka to including ADAA and actually reminding me again why what we do is important. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you again to Otsuka and all the partners, DBSA, the Veteran Affairs Milken Institute, for being involved in this presentation. It's been an honor to be here. So we're going to shift really quickly in the interest of time. There are a lot of misconceptions about what PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder is. Michael and Susan, can you talk a little bit more about what are some of the initiatives that both your organization have in terms of helping to raise awareness of education about PTSD and those who may be living with this condition as it relates to their families and the wider society? Michael, if you want to start? Yes.
You go ahead, Michael.
Okay. Thank you, Kimberly. I think hearing Robert talk a little bit about post-traumatic growth, I thought was really impactful, and maybe a reframe of how to think about recovery for people living with post-traumatic stress leaves me with a really great feeling of hope. We're focused on how we can leverage education to help more people really first recognize what they maybe experience is PTSD. What are those symptoms? And how do, as I said earlier, how do they get more comfortable talking about PTSD with their family, with their providers, and with peers, those that can offer similar lived experience. So I think this is the first step with the hope of feeling that, in a safe way, recognizing and acknowledging what they're going through, can empower peers and their families to really feel equipped to start seeking out the different resources that are available, lots of free resources. DBSA has lots of free resources on our website. Susan and Deborah referenced resources, free resources as well. Those could be wellness-oriented resources, so individuals can work individually on their goals and their recovery. It could be gathering with others, like peer support, as we've been talking about, and of course, resources for family members and care partners.
Susan, you want to share a little bit more about ADA's resources?
So we have many of the same resources, but what I would share that because we're an intersection of a public and professional membership organization, there's a constant loop of feedback. Our members are learning from these stories what is happening. Even those who are not experts in PTSD are now hearing more and more through the intersection of these types of organization, the personal stories, because people get into a niche when they work in the mental health field. So for us, it's this constant interchange of ideas, and that again, our members are sharing the information to the public, and the public is sharing the information of their disorders with our professional member community. And I think that intersection is very important. Yesterday, we were on the call with some researchers, and the researchers said that one of the reasons they join ADAA is that it allows them to hear voices from people that we heard, like from Robert and the others. But one of the things that we are also striving towards is to collect more stories. So I hope that the people who have participated in this event, if you feel comfortable and you want to share your stories, ADAA accepts stories that we share with others, because as we've heard, having hope and hearing from others that they might be going through somewhat similar, I mean, everybody's journey is unique, but somewhat similar stories makes one feel less alone. And that is a powerful feeling, that there are other people who may understand what they're going through. And I don't know if DBSA, do you also collect personal stories?
Yes, we have different ways that peers can share their stories, and we share them with others.
So maybe to the people who've listened in, share your stories with both DBSA and ADAA, knowing that your voice can make a difference to others. So I encourage anyone who wants to, even if you're shy, feel free. We don't judge, and we would love to hear from you. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That really resonates, because at DBSA, we also support the ideal that self-advocacy is a tool to one's wellness. So yes, by sharing stories, not only do you have a chance to say more about your own story, but you get to encourage others and find people who are similar to connect with. So that's very important here. I want to take this time now to open up to all the panelists. I want to ask Deborah and Robert to join this conversation. There's been a lot of great work that's already been accomplished with PTSD, but as we know, this is just the beginning of many conversations and a thimbleful of some of the great work that has been done and needs to still be done. So for our final thoughts, I want to give everyone a chance here to speak to this final question about ways that we can improve our resource sharing. There's been a lot of great resources shared amongst all the panelists here, and sometimes that could be a little overwhelming, but what are the best ways that we as professional advocates, as peers, as caregivers can share resources across the board and make sure that all stakeholders are able to support individuals who live with PTSD? We're going to start, I want to see, we can start back with Robert again.
Yes, thank you. One of the ways I think organizations can continue to be as impactful, even more impactful, is to get you a peer on the staff, someone that's certified as a peer support specialist. Those are individuals that will go directly into the streets. They'll go directly into where the people, the clientele, the individuals that are suffering, where they're at, and let them know about resources. And what we're finding in the peer support world is that individuals that hadn't yet come in to the mental health spectrum will listen to a peer support specialist, because that peer support specialist identifies with them, they connect with them. And so finding more ways to work with individuals that are peer support specialists. And also for everyone that's here, I want to remind you all that shame and stigma kills. It keeps people from sharing and seeking help. And we can't reduce the stigma in the minds of others until we've reduced it or gotten rid of it in our own minds. And so it starts with each and every person that's here on this webinar today. Do what you can to rid yourself of the stigma or shame that you may have as it pertains to mood disorders, and be a light, be a voice, be a beacon of hope for somebody that's going through something like that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Deborah, I want to open that question up to you. There's so much intersectionality between you and Robert's stories and the information that you share. So can you tell us a little bit more from your perspective?
Sure. I had two quick thoughts. One is I recently learned that Johnson & Johnson added a couple of years ago a depression affinity group to its long list of affinity groups that they offer for employees around the world. And it was for both employees who suffer from depression and those who take care of others who suffer from depression. And it has quickly become their largest affinity group in the world throughout the company. And so I would encourage employers who are on the call or people who work for employers to think about starting a group like that. If you can't have Robert and we can't clone him, you know, maybe the next best thing is to try to create a group like that. And just separately, when it comes to the VA resources, you know, the government does not have a marketing department. And so when I talk to the physicians who run, for example, the free PTSD consult service, I said, you know, you must be swamped with people, you know, banging down your door, because who doesn't need a consult in this area? And they said, we're busy, but we have capacity and we are struggling to get the word out that we exist. So I would encourage everybody who's on this call, if there are others that you think could benefit from this information, let's all find ways to share and get these critical resources out there. Thank you, Kimberly.
You're welcome, Deborah. Thank you. Susan, your final thoughts?
So I was just thinking about what Deborah said about companies starting these affinity groups. Not that, you know, I'm trying to shill for any insurance companies, but health insurance companies, but many of them have employee assistance programs. And I think often people forget that they exist. And not all of them are equally as good, but I do think that it is an underutilized resource for many. And I hope that the people who have insurance do look at their employee assistance programs and see if any of those could provide assistance. Sometimes one can get wellness information, some therapy. So that is, I think, potentially an overlooked resource for some.
That makes perfect sense. Michael and the team and I just had a conversation around the utilization of the employee assistance programs. And lastly, I want to give Michael a chance to give final thoughts before we close out.
I would just say we need more sessions like this, the collaboration of organizations coming together, in this case, Otsuka, ADAA, and DBSA, plus all of our panelists. I often say we cannot do this work alone. We have to work with and through our partners. And so seeking partners and partnerships that reach historically marginalized communities or other audiences where we know PTSD and mental health conditions are prevalent, where access to care has significant barriers. How can we facilitate more collaboration and more partnerships so that more resources are shared more broadly?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to all our panelists. With that being said, I'm going to turn things back over to Katie.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. And thank you all for being here with us today. As a reminder, we will share a post-summit recap email with you in the coming days that will contain all of the slides presented today, answers to the questions that you dropped into the chat, and a link to a poll so we can gather some feedback on today's summit. And also another huge thank you to Otsuka for convening this incredibly important discussion. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you all in the months to come. Take care.